She cancels plans last minute for the third time this month. You smile, say, "No worries," and immediately offer to reschedule. 2 days later, she's posting stories at a party you didn't even know about. And suddenly, you're wondering why you always feel like you're chasing while she's barely holding on. If you're new here, welcome to PsyCraft Daily, where we break down the psychology behind relationships that actually make sense in real life. No fluff, just the patterns that change everything once you see them. Let me tell you something most guys never realize until it's too late. The way someone treats you isn't random. It's not about whether they're a good person or a bad person. It's a direct reflection of what you've taught them they can get away with. And here's the part that stings. Every time you let something slide that bothered you, every time you were understanding when you should have been honest, you were training her on exactly how much respect you require. Think about this. When you first meet someone, there's this unspoken negotiation happening beneath every interaction. She's testing, you're responding, and those responses are building a blueprint for the entire relationship. Most guys think being accommodating and flexible makes them attractive. They think boundaries make them difficult or demanding. So they bend, they adjust, they let things go. But here's where it gets interesting. That approach doesn't create attraction. It creates a dynamic where your time, your feelings, and your standards become negotiable. And once something's negotiable, it loses value in her eyes. Not because she's cruel, but because human psychology doesn't work the way we wish it did. Let me show you how this actually works in real time. Boundary 1. Your time has non-negotiable value. Picture this scenario. You've made plans for Friday night. She texts Thursday saying something came up with her friends, asks if you can do Saturday instead. You immediately say yes, because you don't want to seem inflexible. Saturday comes, same thing happens. Her sister needs help with something. Can you do Sunday? Now, here's what most people miss. When you treat your time as infinitely flexible, you're communicating something profound, that nothing in your life is more important than accommodating her schedule. And the paradox? That very accommodation makes her respect your time less, not more. The woman who values you doesn't see your flexibility as kindness. She sees it as a lack of structure, a lack of other priorities, a life that revolves around waiting for her attention. Let that sink in. So, what do? You establish that your time operates on a schedule that matters. When she cancels, you don't immediately offer alternatives. You acknowledge it. No problem, things happen. I've got other plans forming, so let me know when you want to reschedule, and I'll see what I can do. Notice the shift? You're not being cold. You're not playing games. You're simply treating your time the way someone with genuine options would. Because here's the thing. People with options don't rearrange their entire week because someone's availability changed. They have backup plans, other interests, a life that keeps moving. This does something psychological. It reframes the dynamic. Suddenly, access to your time becomes something she needs to coordinate with, not something she assumes. And in that shift, the entire power balance changes. Boundary 2. Emotional availability. Isn't a 24/7 service. Here's a pattern I see constantly. She vents about her day, her problems, her drama. You listen, you empathize, you help her process everything. It feels good because you're being supportive, right? But then you try to share something that's bothering you, and she's distracted, checking her phone, giving you surface-level responses before changing the subject back to herself. This creates what psychologists call emotional inequity. You've become her emotional processing center while your emotional needs get deprioritized. And you let it happen because you don't want to seem needy or demanding. But here's where it gets interesting. When you're always available to process her emotions but never require the same in return, you're not being noble. You're training her to see your feelings as less important than hers. The relationship becomes functionally one-directional. Think about this dynamic in any other context. Imagine a friendship where one person only calls when they need something, but is always busy when you reach out. You'd recognize that pattern immediately. But in romantic relationships, we convince ourselves it's different because we're afraid of losing connection. Let me show you what changes everything. Start being selective about when you engage emotionally, not as punishment, not as manipulation, but as a genuine reflection of your capacity. When she starts venting and you're genuinely busy or not in the space to process it, you say, "I want to give this the attention it deserves, but I'm not in the right headspace right now. Can we talk about this tonight?" The magic happens in what comes next. When you do share something meaningful, you pay attention to her response. Does she actually engage? Does she ask follow-up questions? Or does she treat it as an interruption to her narrative? If it's the latter, you address it directly, but calmly. I notice when I share things, the conversation tends to shift pretty quickly. I'm here for you, but I need that to flow both ways. Boundary 3. Disrespect gets named, not absorbed. She makes a cutting comment about something you care about. Maybe it's your career choice, your hobby, your friend group. You laugh it off because confrontation feels uncomfortable. Maybe you even join in on the joke at your own expense to keep things light. Here's what most people miss. Every time you let disrespect pass without acknowledgement, you're setting the acceptable baseline lower. It's not about being oversensitive. It's about establishing that certain things aren't open for mockery or dismissal. I watched this play out with a friend recently. His girlfriend would make jokes about his height in front of other people. He'd laugh along because he didn't want to seem insecure, but you could see it eating at him. The jokes got more frequent, more casual, more embedded into how she related to him. One day he finally said calmly and privately, "Hey, I know you think you're joking, but the comments about my height actually bother me. I'd appreciate if we could retire that as a topic." Simple, direct, no drama. And here's what happened. She immediately got defensive, said he was being too sensitive, that she was just joking around. Classic response when someone's testing boundaries gets checked. But here's the thing. He didn't argue. He just repeated, "I understand you see it as joking. I'm telling you, it doesn't feel that way to me, and I need you to respect that boundary." The relationship shifted in that moment, not because she suddenly became more respectful across the board, but because he established that his feelings weren't up for debate. Respect became non-negotiable, and that changed the entire framework of how she approached communication with him. So, what do you do when disrespect shows up? You name it in the moment or shortly after. Not with anger, not with lectures. Just clear acknowledgement. That comment didn't land well with me. I'm not cool with that kind of joke. The response tells you everything. Someone who values you will course correct. Someone who doubles down or gaslights you about being too sensitive is showing you exactly who they are. Believe them. Boundary 4. Your standards. Don't lower to match bad behavior. She does something that crosses a line. Maybe she flirts with someone else in front of you. Maybe she shares something private you asked her to keep between you. Maybe she makes plans on a night you'd already discussed spending together. The instinct for most guys, lower the standard to match the behavior. Maybe I'm being too rigid. Maybe I need to be more understanding. Maybe this is just how modern relationships work. Let me tell you something crucial. When you lower your standards to accommodate behavior that violates your values, you don't create harmony. You create resentment that builds silently until it explodes, or until you become a shell of who you were. Here's the pattern most people never see. She tests the boundary once, you let it slide. She tests it again, bigger this time. You express mild discomfort, but ultimately accept it. By the third time, it's become normal. You've retroactively made it acceptable by not enforcing the boundary when it mattered. Think about this. You tell her early on that loyalty is non-negotiable for you. Then she maintains an obviously flirtatious text thread with an X. You see it, it bothers you, but you don't say anything because you don't want to seem jealous or controlling. But here's where it gets interesting. That silence isn't neutrality. it's permission. It's you teaching her that your stated values don't actually have enforcement mechanisms. And once someone learns that, they stop taking your boundaries seriously across the board. So, what do? You hold the line exactly where you set it. When behavior crosses a boundary you've established, you address it clearly. We talked about how important loyalty is to me. This situation with your ex makes me uncomfortable, and it conflicts with what we agreed matters in this relationship. Now, her response here is crucial. Does she get defensive and blame you for being insecure? Or does she take responsibility and adjust her behavior because she values your relationship more than maintaining that dynamic? The answer tells you whether you're in a relationship where mutual respect exists, or whether you're in a dynamic where your boundaries are treated as suggestions she can ignore when convenient. Boundary 5. You're willing to walk away. Here's the boundary that makes all the others work. Everything we've talked about means nothing if you're not genuinely willing to end the relationship when boundaries are consistently violated. Let that sink in. Most guys set boundaries but communicate through their actions that they'll never actually leave. They'll complain, they'll argue, they'll feel resentful, but they'll stay. And once someone knows you'll stay regardless of how they treat you, every boundary becomes theater. I'm not saying you should be looking for reasons to leave. I'm saying the willingness to leave must be real for respect to exist. Think about any negotiation. The side with no leverage, with no alternative options, with no willingness to walk away always gets the worst deal. Relationships aren't negotiations in the transactional sense, but the psychology is identical. Here's what changes everything. When you genuinely, know you'll be okay without this relationship. When you've built a life that stands complete on its own. When you're with her because you choose to be, rather than because you need to be. Your entire energy shifts. You stop tolerating things that violate your values because you're not operating from fear of loss. You can address issues directly because the outcome doesn't threaten your core stability. And women sense this. They can tell the difference between someone who's bluffing about boundaries and someone who means every word. So, what do? You build the kind of life where a relationship is an addition, not the foundation. You invest in friendships, hobbies, career, personal growth. You create a version of yourself that you genuinely like spending time with. And from that foundation, you enter relationships as a whole person, choosing to share time with another whole person. When boundaries get violated repeatedly despite clear communication, you don't issue ultimatums or threats. You simply follow through. You leave, not out of anger or punishment, but because you respect yourself enough to not accept less than what you deserve. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit. Setting boundaries doesn't guarantee she'll treat you better. Some people will see your boundaries and decide they don't want to meet that standard. And that's okay. That's actually the boundary working exactly as intended. Boundaries aren't manipulation tactics to control someone else's behavior. They're clarifying mechanisms that reveal compatibility. When you establish clear boundaries, you're not trying to change her. You're revealing whether the dynamic between you can exist with mutual respect, or whether it only functions when you're accommodating violations of your values. The relationships that work, the ones where genuine respect flows both directions, they happen when two people with clear boundaries choose to honor each other's standards. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because they value the relationship more than they value the ego. Hit of getting their way. Think about where you are right now. Are you in a dynamic where your boundaries get respected, or are you constantly adjusting what you'll accept to maintain connection? The answer to that question determines whether you're building something real or participating in a slow erosion of self-respect. Your boundaries aren't the problem. Being afraid to enforce them is. And the moment you genuinely care more about respecting yourself than about whether she stays, that's the moment everything changes. Sometimes she rises to meet your standards. Sometimes she walks away. Either way you win, because you've chosen dignity over dysfunction. That's the real shift. Not controlling her behavior, but controlling your willingness to accept less than what you deserve. Everything else follows from there.